Hello, everybody. Today we're talking about a very important element of United States history leading up to the Civil War, a compromise referred to as the Missouri Compromise. So we see here in our bottom right, we see Henry Clay, and of course he's here because remember, he's involved in literally everything. All right, our objective question today, what were the effects of the Missouri Compromise? Here we go. All right, so remember that we have a ton of awesome territory to the left of us in what used to be, right, the Louisiana Purchase, and all this territory needs to eventually become states. And in the year 1819, Missouri gets to that point where they have enough people, they want to petition Congress for statehood, and they say, hey, we would like to officially become a state. But there's a problem. Is Missouri going to enter the country as a free state or a slave state? At this point, there are slaves in the Missouri Territory, and we're concerned that if we let Missouri in right now as it is, they would become a slave state. And the reason the Northerners are concerned about that is because right now, currently, there are 11 slave states and 11 free states, which means that if it comes down to a tie, it's tied along party lines. No one has the majority, right? The slave states can't, override the North, and the North can't override the South because everything is tied. But if Missouri enters as a slave state, the slave states would then have 12 states and be able to, overpower the free states. So the North starts thinking kind of quickly, how can we prevent Missouri from becoming a slave state or having complete, control? And what we come up with is the Tallmadge Amendment, created by a man named Tallmadge. And the idea behind the Tallmadge Amendment is kind of like a mini compromise. Missouri will be let in, slavery could exist, but the Tallmadge Amendment is about aging out slavery. The idea that no new slaves can come into Missouri, and by the time that the slave children in this state turn 25, they would be free. So basically, if the Tallmadge Amendment, and there's Tallmadge right there, if the Tallmadge Amendment had been approved and had gone through, this would be a mini compromise in itself. Missouri would enter as a slave state, but gradually slavery would, age out of Missouri. Okay, sounds kind of reasonable, but of course, the South doesn't like this idea. The South sees the Tallmadge Amendment as, basically a war on slavery, which it kind of was, right? It was a gradual one, but it was a war on slavery. And the South is particularly concerned because Missouri is going to be the first state to be made up of entirely Louisiana territory, right? And so we're concerned, the South is concerned that if Missouri follows the Tallmadge Amendment, that potentially other states made up of Louisiana territory could follow the same process, and then slavery would be aged out of the Louisiana territory, and the South would be the only ones who are allowed to have slaves. And this concerns the Southerners. They don't like this idea. They don't like the idea of abolishing slavery. They don't like the idea of potentially losing slavery down the road, and because of this, the Tallmadge Amendment never passes. But Missouri is getting kind of antsy. It's been a while. We need to come up with something. The North doesn't want another slave state. The South doesn't want to potentially lose a slave state. So what are we going to do? And enter the Missouri Compromise. Of course, created by our guy, Henry Clay, right? The man who's involved in absolutely everything brings us the Missouri Compromise. Henry Clay is literally nicknamed the Great Compromiser because he comes up with so many solutions to issues during this time period. All right, so his plan becomes known as the Missouri Compromise. We are going to pass it. What we need to know is the elements of the Missouri Compromise and why they were so important, all right? The first element of the Missouri Compromise, Missouri is going to enter, they are going to become a state, and they're going to be a slave state. So the Southerners start going, woo, yeah, that's what we wanted. The Northerners look at Clay and say, oh my gosh, how is this a compromise? And Clay says, that's all right, because not only is the South going to gain a state, but the North is going to gain a state as well. The Missouri Compromise allows not just for the statehood of Missouri, but also for the statehood of Maine, which at this point has just been an extension of the Massachusetts state. It's a territory kind of controlled by Massachusetts, and it's going to gain its statehood through this compromise. All right, so one slave state, one free state. We keep the balance. Instead of 11 versus 11, now it's 12 versus 12, right? So slave states and free states have equal representation. That was very important, and Clay is giving us that answer. But he also says we can't do this every single time a new territory wants to become a state. So what we're also going to do, and the third element of the Missouri Compromise, is that we're going to draw a line, and this line is going to be on the 3630 parallel, and we're going to use this line to mark the official border of slavery. And everything above that line is going to be free and will never become a slave state, and everything below that line has the opportunity to be a slave state. All right, and if we look, it is also kind of ironic that Missouri is actually above this line that we're saying no slavery will ever be above, but it's just a special exception. All right, so three aspects of the Missouri Compromise. Missouri is a slave state, Maine is a free state, and we're also going to draw this line that will decide above if it's free and below if it's slave. If we look at this map in a little bit more detail, Missouri, of course, is going to become a slave state. That's why it's pink. Maine is going to become a northern free state. That's why it's green. And this is that line we're going to draw. And everything above it, all of this land is going to be free. And this land down here has the potential to be a slave state when it applies for statehood. This is a pretty great idea when it comes to moving forward and helping these two very, very divided regions get along. Because we're not just fixing the immediate problem of Missouri and also Maine, but we're also setting a precedent for future conflict so we can avoid this compromise every single time. Now, were people happy about this? Absolutely. The South loved this, all right? The South walked away, and that's the great part of a compromise, is when both sides walk away feeling like they got the better deal, right? And that's exactly what happens with the Missouri Compromise. The South, got Missouri. That's kind of what they wanted. They were really afraid that, slavery was going to get affected there. Nope, they got it. They also walk away without any regions or areas losing or will gradually lose slavery, so that's a win for them. And, you could argue the downside of this compromise for the South is that they're not going to have an opportunity to get any of this, the upper region, the region above the line. They're not going to have slavery in there, but they're okay with that because the land north of the line, especially really far north of the line, isn't really conducive to any of the planting that the Southerners are wanting to do. It's the warmer southern climate that these cash crops grow well in. So literally they see the Northerners as circling this giant part of the map that they're not even interested in. And when they're told they can't have it, they say, okay, we got what we want already, right? On the other hand, the North is very excited because there's a humongous portion of the United States that we're officially saying will not become a slave state or slave states. So they're really happy about that. And when they look at the map, if they look at this small region that can potentially become slave states, in their mind, they're not really concerned about that because at most they think that'll be about 2 states. If we're looking at this available territory, because remember, all of this gray area is Spanish possession. So the way the Northerners are looking at it, at least based on the current map, is that at the most, the South is going to be able to add about 2 more states. The Spanish are going to keep them from expanding much more. So both sides are going to be extremely pleased with the Missouri Compromise. Now, in terms of legacy and lasting impacts, one, it's going to help us immediately prevent a civil war. And it was looking like that was a possibility at this point. After the Talmadge Amendment fell through and the North and South was really at one another's throats, it looked like it was possible that a civil war could be on the immediate horizon. But this Missouri Compromise is going to help kind of de-escalate the situation. Both sides feel a little bit better about it. And for about 34 more years, we're going to be able to continue with the Missouri Compromise as the status quo. So immediate impacts is it prevents a civil war. Also, of course, moving forward, slavery is going to continue to be a very important issue in American politics. Literally, the next, few units we're looking at all revolve around, to some level, how people felt about slavery. And of course, remember yesterday we talked about sectionalism and the idea that instead of having a nationalistic pride, you have a sectionalism pride. The whole idea of the North and the South is going to become a lot more prominent now. We have extreme divide within our country, very, very high tensions. And Henry Clay, while immediately his compromise is loved, when we look back on it, a lot of abolitionists, a lot of Northerners are going to criticize Henry Clay as being an appeaser. When you appease something, you're giving in. You're giving in some concessions in order to avoid something worse. And that's, when you look at it objectively, that's exactly what Henry Clay did. He gave the South a southern state. He gave them, potential to expand, but it is a compromise. And for a compromise to be accepted, both sides need to get something. But later on, Clay is going to be criticized for this by the abolitionists and Northerners. So if we look at this map once again, right, we'll go over one more time. This area right here, Missouri becomes a slave state. Up here, Maine becomes a free state, and we have this 3630 line that divides it. So now everything underneath it can become slave, everything above it will be free. Look at the small amount of territory that the Southerners are going to have. But they're all right with that because most of this territory up here is pretty much useless for farming. Also remember, it's very ironic, right, that Missouri is actually above the slave line, but we're just going to pretend we don't notice that. Famously, when Thomas Jefferson heard of the Missouri Compromise, also referred to as the Compromise of 1820 because that's the year it was passed, Thomas Jefferson famously referred to it as a fire bell in the night. If we think back to the good old days when fires were something we had to be really, really scared of, a fire bell is something that people would ring in the middle of the night to let everybody else know that there was a fire. So people would, one, wake up, and two, respond to the issue. Thomas Jefferson is comparing the issue of slavery, especially in American politics, to a fire bell, to a fire that's raging, and we need to address it. And Thomas Jefferson has some great foreshadowing here in terms of the future of our country and future issues we're going to have. If you have access to the PowerPoint, this is a great video that explains and summarizes the Missouri Compromise. It's pretty much exactly what I just told you, but he tells it in a slightly different way. He has some graphics, there are some maps, so go ahead and watch that. It's only like 2 or 3 minutes long. All right, that's it. Make sure you answer your objective question, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.